Hello everybody, my name is Aiden, and today we're going to be talking about how much your private pilot's license is going to cost. So everybody knows that flying is definitely an expensive hobby and an expensive career and just expensive to even think about, it seems like sometimes. And the first step is getting your private pilot's license. Now I want to clear up that these numbers that I'm going to give you aren't exact numbers because it's going to change depending on what flight school you use, where you live, how many hours or how much training essentially you're going to need to get your license, because everybody learns at a different pace. And so there's a lot of factors that are going to change. But today I want to mow over and get out all the general stuff and how much, and give you a good idea of how much it's going to cost you by the time you pass your check ride. This is a great time to mention that I have made a complete spreadsheet of every single expense I paid during my flight training. I've linked that spreadsheet down below into the description. And that's a link to a Google spreadsheet that'll show you everything that I spent on all 5 categories that we're going to go over. Those 5 categories are plane rental, fuel, flight instruction, miscellaneous costs, and optional costs. There is a difference between those two, so I'll go over that in a little bit. But first, let's start with the biggest chunk of change, and that is plane rental. So renting an airplane is going to cost a lot of money, and it's going to be the biggest expense that you're going to pay during flight training. I rent a Cessna 172 for $100 an hour, and that's not including fuel. So since I got my license at 68 flight hours, you can do the math and look at the spreadsheet, but that's almost $6,800 I spent on just renting the airplane. Now there are other options for your flight training, like you could buy an airplane and then get instruction in that, and that could save you money in a sense, but I'm gonna make another video about that topic. So stay subscribed and let me know in the comments if you want to see that. But let's just assume you're renting a regular old Cessna. So renting the airplane is going to be the most expensive part, especially if you're renting a nicer airplane with better avionics or just a newer airplane. It's going to cost even more. Some flight schools include the cost of fuel. Some flight schools include the cost of fuel into the plane rental, and that's called a wet rate. And a dry rate is when they don't include the fuel and you have to pay for it yourself. So I was paying $100 an hour dry rate, meaning I paid my own fuel. So that's another great topic to get into, is fuel. Fuel is also going to be a big chunk of change during your flight training. Every time you fly the airplane, you got to fuel it. So how much is that going to cost? At the end of my flight training, I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say my fuel is around $1,500 for all 68 hours of training. This is going to fluctuate depending on how much avgas is near you, how long you fly, how much fuel you burn. I was paying about $4.60 per gallon during my flight training, and the plane was burning about 8 gallons an hour. So at my 68 hours, I ended up spending about $1,500. Flight instruction. So flight instruction is going to be the second biggest cost behind plane rental. The reason it's not the same cost as plane rental is because there's going to be hours where you're with an instructor and you're paying him to help teach you to fly. And there's also going to be times where you're flying by yourself for practice and you don't have to pay the instructor while you're in the air. And you're going to be flying solo by yourself for practice, and your instructor isn't there, so you're not having to pay him. So it's going to be a little bit cheaper. On instruction fees, I also spent several $1,000s on flight instruction, but it was definitely less than the cost of the plane rental. I can't remember the exact number. I really should have looked at the spreadsheet before I started making this video, but I want to say it was around $4,500. So now that we got that out of the way, we're going to talk about optional expenses and miscellaneous expenses. First is miscellaneous expenses. Miscellaneous expenses are random things that you're going to need that you are going to need for flight training. Optional expenses are things that you can, to get better training, purchase, however they're not required. So miscellaneous expenses are going to be things like purchasing a headset or purchasing sectional charts that you're going to need for flying. It's going to be things like buying renter's insurance for flying, because you're going to need to carry insurance even when you're not an actual pilot, when you're just training. You can go check out the miscellaneous column of my spreadsheet, and I spent around $800 to $900. Now the optional expenses is the one where it's going to fluctuate to you. You could save a ton of money and do none of them, or you can do all of them and get more training. Things I put into this category are extra ground instruction that you don't need. When I went through my training, I finished with over 50 hours of ground instruction. That's actually a lot, because most people just study and do all that stuff at home. However, a mentor of mine was amazing and gave me a really good deal on ground instruction and was kind enough to teach me at a lower cost. So I got a lot extra training than I needed. So I'm including that in the optional category. There is going to be some ground training you're going to need to pay for, but it's not as much as I did. Also things like buying an iPad or a GPS subscription service like ForeFlight to help you navigate and just make your life easier while learning to fly. Those are all optional expenses that you don't necessarily need to purchase. Another one was I went to a 2-day Aviation Seminar, which was 2 9-hour days of packed information getting me ready for my written test. And that also cost about $400, which if you're really good at studying at home and you think you can learn the information on your own, then you'll be able to save all that money. I spent a few $100s in this category as well. So when it's all said and done, I spent over $14,000 on my pilot's license. Now, I actually was so fortunate to earn a $10,000 scholarship locally here. And if you want to learn more about that, I will link a video to that as well. Go check out the channel, and I have videos about how I got that scholarship and how you can apply for your own if you're a kid as well. But anyway, so I was fortunate enough to get a lot of that cost paid for. However, the total cost of the license was over $14,000. And I actually think that is a little bit cheaper than a lot of other places I've looked at. I've looked at other places near me or in LA, San Francisco, and bigger cities, and it's definitely much more expensive. And I also know people who purchased an airplane, flown in it for their flight training, and then sold it after their flight training. So we're going to talk about all three of these, and the reason for that is
Watching this video, hopefully I was able to let you guys get a little bit of insight on how much your pilot's license is going to cost. I'm sorry I can't give you a hard number because it just depends on you and your situation. If you have any other questions, please let me know in the comments down below. Check out some of the other videos on the channel if you want to learn how I became a pilot at such a young age. Thank you everybody for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.